Spring has sprung, and here in Minnesota, aside from May flowers, it also means farmers markets will start popping up, allowing shoppers to support local farm-to-fork businesses. These producers may be small scale, but they help prevent food deserts in their communities and stimulate the economy. With me now is Republican Senator Bill Lieske, who says these small businesses can have a big impact, and he aims to give them more opportunities to do just that. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So you have a bill that impacts Minnesota's cottage food producers. Let's start at the beginning. What are cottage foods and who produces them?
Okay, so cottage foods is very similar to what it sounds like. Granted, I don't think it's made in a cottage anymore, but most of the time it is in-home producers that produce foods, baked goods mostly, that are very specific to some regulations that we have in place, but they're very safe foods in the regards of those regulations. And so who produces them? Just pretty much anybody. A lot of people are looking for a secondary income, or they're staying at home with their kids. A lot of stay-at-home moms participate, things like that.
Okay, so like our neighbors could be.
You might be surprised how many people would be in the cottage foods industry. Yeah.
All right, Senator, how much of an impact do these cottage food producers or that industry have on our larger economy?
They can have a pretty huge impact. During the committee hearings and things like that, we heard about what types of things that they do impact. And in this case, like you were talking about here at the intro, is that food deserts are a big issue. We have places where getting to food is a challenge. And so these individuals happen to be at a farmer's market. So things like that.
Senator, this seems to be somewhat of a unique industry, smaller, of course, because it's the cottage foods, small-scale producers. So how did this issue catch your attention?
So it's kind of funny you ask, but it happens to be because of my neighbors. So I happen to live in a very small town. Lonsdale, Minnesota is where I live. I happen to be the chiropractor there, and a few of my patients and actually neighbors happen to be cottage foods producers, and I had no idea what it was about. Before I ran for office, I just had their cakes or their specialty treats, and so I just happened to know about what they had. And when I became a senator, they said, "Hey, by the way, there's these weird limits on how much we can make or things like that, and can you look into this and can you maybe write a bill to change that?" So I didn't know the venture that I was going to be starting on in 2023 when I wrote a bill just to change that base price of how much they could make.
It's really neat to know the kind of impact you can have as a senator and how accessible you are to neighbors, community members. So that's really wonderful that they were able to reach you that way and have an impact that could be statewide. Speaking of, your bill, Senate File 391, aims to amend the state's current cottage food laws, which are called the Pickle Bill.
Originally.
So what are those current laws? Take me through the Pickle Bill, and what does your bill hope to change?
So the history of it is something that I ended up diving into, not knowing by introducing this bill that I was going to get introduced to all this history. I believe way back in the early 2000s is when the Pickle Bill originated. I think it's 2005. Can't remember the exact date. It's either 2003 or 2005. Of course, the cottage foods industry people would be disappointed that I can't give you the exact date. But that's when it started, and it had a very low cap on it. I think it was $18,000 is all they were allowed to earn. So then fast forward into the early 2010s, they started pushing for higher caps, and that got up to the point where they're at, I think in 2021, which was the $78,000. Then my bill, introduced in 2023, the first version of this update, was to move it to $85,000. Unfortunately, we just didn't quite get there. And it just kind of fizzled out, and we had some changes, but not very many. The big thing was shipping was another part of the discussion that they wanted, because it allows them to get to places, again, even more food desert-like. I talked to a gentleman from Grand Rapids, actually, of all places, and he does freeze-dried foods, and he wanted to be able to have his business be able to get across that area of northern Minnesota. It's a very hard area. You can't just simply drive and drop it off. Right now, that's the state law is that you have to drop it off. You have to be the end producer and the person who delivers it to the end user. And so he's excited to see that ability because his business can then grow and function really well. So that's kind of the basics of where it was and how it's going.
Thank you, Senator. During the committee hearing for this bill, a representative from the Legislation Institute for Justice testified on behalf of your bill, and they said it improves economic liberty in the state. What does that mean?
So economic liberty means it's another way for somebody to earn money, and it gives them the right to do that without having to go through all of the heavy, burdensome red tape, as we like to call it. The one important thing about cottage foods that's different than most commercial industry food-related issues is there's not a huge commercial kitchen requirement. There's no commercial licensing requirements. This is actually an exemption, as Senator Putnam would be very keen to point out, is this is an exemption, not a license. And so that's the really big difference here, and that's where I think she was talking about economic liberty.
Okay. During that hearing, there were some concerns brought up about food safety and holding these small-scale, home-based food producers accountable. How do you respond to those kinds of concerns?
So, whilst those are big concerns and valid, I do worry about food safety as well. Working as a healthcare provider myself and being in the industry of healthcare, and actually in my undergrad I spent a lot of time in an emerging diseases lab, learning about how microbiology can cause some pretty significant problems. The difference is when you cook at home, and these products that they produce have to have a specific acidic level, they have to have a specific water value. In fact, they need to be pretty dry, and they have hydrometers, so they're testing all these things in order to sell them under the cottage foods exemption. So they have to follow a very strict guideline in order to sell those things. It's not just like, hey, I'm going to make this product and go sell it and there's no questions. There are very strict guidelines as to what they can sell. And so that's why I don't think that the safety is much in question. They link it back to there's not very many complaints related to the food side.
Okay. Now, Senator, there's a lot going on nationally, internationally in regards to agricultural products and where they are not going. So are we primed for this to be a really good, unique moment for cottage food producers?
Absolutely. So that's a good question. And I would ask questions in return is, obviously with the uncertainty, we don't know where it's going. So there's obviously that question. But the question then is, can this fill in that gap? We're not going to be importing foods if that's the case. If we're not going to be importing foods due to tariffs or things of that nature, then maybe this is a good opportunity for those individuals, to start their business and then grow the business to a point where they are using a commercial kitchen. So it's a very good launching pad for these small businesses.
Now, your bill was successful in committee and it was added to the omnibus bill. So if it becomes law, if it goes through the rest of the process, how soon can we get our favorite cottage foods shipped to our homes?
So as far as I can tell, I believe it is going to be an August 1st start date, if I remember right from the original bill. Of course, that could change anytime. Those omnibus bills get a little goofy sometimes with conference committees and things. So the exact date, I'm not entirely certain, but I believe August 1st is the goal.
Fantastic. Love that. Okay. Senator, any final thoughts?
I don't think so, other than I appreciate your time, and I look forward to the food freedom that's coming with cottage foods.
I do too. All right. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much.